And we're back. I'm Ossie from Three Monkeys Solderless, home of the world's best cables for your pedal board. We got DC, we got audio, we got cable, we got all kinds of stuff. So check us out at the link below for all your pedal board needs. We also have RCA stuff for you guys that are home audio enthusiasts or car audio, want to do an installation, all that kind of stuff. So check us out down there. All right, so we're back on chasing the tone, or should we say tones maybe? But right now, maybe tone or tones. And last week, I think was kind of like a good week for me to thinking about stuff. That sort of getting the direct sound right was sort of like, I think, you know, it's always been there. Like I've always sort of thought that had to be the case. But sort of moving it in and getting it working a little bit and then hearing it in the different rooms of Sunset Sound really kind of, I think, brought it to another place for my ears. Right now, we all hear things differently. So I'm not saying, you know, that this is the way you do it. And if you don't do it this way, you don't know what you're doing and blah, 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 blah. And I got it. No, I'm trying to get to where I'm happy. And, you know, maybe you guys would agree with it. If you don't, that's cool too, and we can work on stuff. But what I thought about, right, was how the rooms of Sunset Sound, when I was kind of like panning around looking for like, oh, let's see what reverb chamber I want to use. Let's see what we want to use with this live room, this live room. And it really, at that moment, it hit me right away that how much that room sound of Sunset, those different studio sounds, impacted the sound of his guitar. Now I think there's a root sound, right, which is sort of like a fingerprint that I keep talking about, right? A fingerprint of his guitar amplifier, how it distorted, how it worked, and presented a waveform. And I'm still happy with the way the Marshmallow is working for all that. I think it's presenting the right waveform, the right kind of distortion characteristics, the right levels of sustain with more distortion than sustain, so to speak, or that, you know, that it doesn't have that cascaded sort of sound to it. And then it was like, well, why is it that amplifier sounds so differently all the time in a lot of ways, like going from, you know, 1 to 2 to, you know, Fair Warning or Women and Children to 1984. I think all of it is really related to the rooms and to the mix of how the close mic'd direct sounds, room sounds, and reverberated chambered sounds are blended together and what they offer in the sound. So what struck me the most about looking at last week, just running through things, was like Van Halen 2. It just went like bink. That's got to be Van Halen 2. So it's like the studio room sound, I think, is the prevalent sound on his guitar for the second album. Now, I remember the first time I heard that album, and this is going back a really long time ago. And, you know, Van Halen 1 was sort of, you know, stuck in my head at that point before obviously hearing Van Halen 2. And the first thing I thought of when I heard that sound was like, God, it sounded like he recorded this album in a garbage can. You know, I don't mean bad, but it was like really hollow sounding, right? Really hollow sounding, like the sound you'd get if you put, you know, like a radio or a speaker inside of a large garbage can, right? You'd get that big hollow kind of sound. And then all of a sudden I heard that in one of the rooms in Sunset Sound again, and I was like, that's got to be it. So there's probably, you know, going to the 1984 video where I'm like, I think the room sound is most of 1984. With some direct and some reverb added. Van Halen 1, the same way. Van Halen 2 has to be the same way too. So I figured today we'd explore and start to touch upon, let's say, some of the Van Halen 2 stuff. And that may, you know, my brain doesn't really work in a straight line. I don't really excel at linear thinking. It's always like, oh, that reminded me or struck something loose. Now I have to go on a jag off to the side. But sometimes it'll bring me back to where I want to go, but with what I was trying to get to in a straight line. So anyway, I'm just rolling with it. This is all I'm doing. This is not planned stuff where I'm like, I'm going to do this and this and this, and then we're going to, I don't know. I'm just rolling with it. So you're sort of seeing it live as I go. So right now I haven't had any pre-thoughts since last week. I haven't even messed around with the amplifier or played guitar really in a week. I've been up to my butt in other sort of like projects here, other repairs and other musicians' projects and things like that. So I haven't had a chance to prepare too much. So we're going to do this thing kind of like live as you see it. And it may work, it may suck, I don't know. But we're going to go into GarageBand again, and we're going to listen to, we're going to try to like see if that theory holds out that the room sound for Van Halen 2 is the predominant sound, and how to mix all that together. And, do a rough and dirty sort of attempt at that sort of like a deal. So anyway, let's get into GarageBand and start listening. Oh, again, we're going to be using, just for reference, we're going to be still using the white guitar with the custom Alnico magnet, right? Still got the Eddie Gauge light strings, 40 through 9. We're using the Marshmallow straight into one channel, the lead channel. Everything on gag, except for this knob here, which I've got down a little bit, we're using the Aux Stomp, and it's set to the Van Halen 1 from last week, that same sort of impulse response, which has some direct sound and some greenback punch. And I may mess with that a little bit and see if that, if we need more or less direct versus greenback. So that's sort of the setup. And then that's just going into the Focusrite and then into GarageBand. So let's go into GarageBand and take a look. All right, so we're in GarageBand and we have our track for the vocal mic. I've created a new project just for the Van Halen 2 thing. We're going to do a lot of the similar type of process as I tried on the last week's Van Halen 1 thing. So what the first thing to do is going to be just to create a new track for the guitar, and that would be on input 3 on my Focusrite, which would be coming from the Aux Stomp. All right, let me grab my guitar here. And this is the same setting from last week from the Van Halen 1 stuff. So it has the direct balanced for that album. I'm probably going to play around with that a little bit just for the hell of it, because I think there's a little less direct sound on the second. So I'm just going to listen to it. So this is like just the unprocessed, straight in kind of sound, direct and greenback punch. Yeah, we got to remove the feedback protection. All right, so I'm going to adjust it a little bit. We're going to start by turning down both of the microphones, the virtual microphones on the Aux Stomp, and we're going to bring up the greenback first. So you can hear how thick that is, right? And then we'll bring in some of the direct, and you'll hear how that again affects the sound. You can hear it coming in there like, like a whizzer cone, like the aluminum on the, well, wouldn't you know it? Hear the fire truck? This place is pretty well insulated, but it's not always a good thing to have your studio set up right across the street from the fire station. Leave it. Some of you might get that reference. All right, so that's not right for this song, so we're going to adjust that. I like that. That sounds thick and kind of gooey and chewy. So I like that. All right. So now comes the part where I got to lay down a Van Halen 2 simulation guitar playing for us to mess with like last week. So once again, here come the clams. Forgive it. So we're gonna do I don't know, we'll just play some riffs so that we have something to work on. So let's just start. I'm gonna take out the vocal mic and start recording the guitar. All right, that sucks, but for the purposes of demonstration, that shall suffice. I'll have to take a swig of the pink drink. Hold on a second. Probably should have had some of that before. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create the 3 layers that I'm theorizing the sound may be made of. So it's going to be what we just heard there, which is a combination of direct and close miking with the dynamics of the SM57. And then we're going to compose a track of the room sound. And then we're going to compose a track of the room sound with the chamber. Now I theorize that the chamber sound, right? The big reverb sound. The source for that, I'm going to have to say, was going to be the room microphones. The reason being is if you want to create, in my mind anyway, it would make sense if you wanted to create a homogeneous sound for the band, you know, because you're going to have reverb on everything, so to speak, the vocals, the bass, the drums. If you want to create a homogeneous sound for the band, you'd want to send it all as in one package out to the reverb. Right out to the reverb chamber and then bring that back. You wouldn't want to do it individually, I don't think. Maybe you'd want to send a mix of all the instruments out there and back, but to me that sounds like it's a lot of work. And it seems like one of Don's genius things was to be, you know, elegant, right? He didn't like to really make things too complicated. Just from the way that I'm reading him in his speech patterns and how he sort of works, it seems like he's a pretty uncomplicated person in terms of like and coming up with elegant, simple solutions to problems. So that's my theory, that we're going to use the room sound as the reverb sound. Now, also the room sound, I think, is what's contributing to that kind of, you know, that hollow guitar sound that we're hearing on Van Halen 2 versus 1. All right, so anyway, enough blabbing, and let's go and create another track. All right, so a new track. This is going to have no input, right? Because it's just a bounce track. All right, so we're going to take our recorded signal and bring it down here, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to basically consider this. We're going to consider audio 2. Let's start labeling stuff so we don't get confused here, because we're probably going to keep this. This is going to be the guitar input recording from the aux. Okay. Then, all right, so we're just going to use this for creating actual tracks, and then we're going to bounce them down to these tracks where there is going to be, why does it say still? I wanted no input on this one. There we go. All right. So this track we're going to call this track, just call this dry. All right. And then we're going to create another track with the identical settings as this one. All right. And let's just make sure, yes, no input. We're going to call this rename track. We're going to call this one room. All right. And we're going to copy this track. All right. Copy the track. And we're going to bring it down to here. And we're going to paste it in there. All right. So now we have two tracks of the identical signal. So, you know, this is sort of like what you would do, perhaps, with multiple microphone inputs. So now we're going to make this the room. All right, so now let's mute the dry track, go to the room track, and let's start building the room chain. So I'm going to, once again, need to take in the great IK Multimedia Sunset Sound Reverb Simulator, because we're going to need the room for this. So I'm going to pull down the fader a little bit on this, and then we're going to go into the live rooms, and we're going to listen to them. Because I think I remember, too, having that kind of hollowed out sound to it. So we'll kind of bring that in, and we'll mess with it a little bit. All right, so let's start listening to it and see what we get. All right, turn it on. There it is. That sounds really hollow. Let's bring back the track again. I need to make a little bit of a loop. Let's just loop the loop a little bit of it, right? So let me just move this out of the way so that I can loop. Let's say like, I'll just loop this part. All right, here we go. Let's get back into the dry, back into the room, rather, and into the Sunset Sound. And now we're going to listen to... Nah. So one again. It's hollow, but not hollow enough. That's got to be it. Right? Listen to the difference. Okay. Now, it has a lot of, let's say, echo. So let's see what happens if we take down, this is just stuff I was thinking about, so I don't know how this is going to work. Let's take down the decay a bunch and the pre-delay. All right, so no, you know what? Let's bring up the pre-delay. Let's keep the pre-delay up a little bit. That's good. Because that may help a little bit with like sort of like adding a bit of a chorusy kind of sound to it. So let's try 20 some odd milliseconds there. Also, I'm hearing something up in the upper high frequencies, you know, above 8K, that's kind of tinky sounding. I think it's a product of the room accentuating certain frequencies. So we're probably going to need to tamp that down a little bit. So we may need to put in, you know, like an EQ before or after this room sound. But let's start playing with the decay and the pre-delay a little bit, so we could get this to sound not so echoey, but thickening. It's like a thickening agent more so than an ambiance thing, and maybe compress it too. But let's see. Let's play it. I think that sounds pretty good. Add in some dry. Okay, I think a little bit of dry in there helps a little bit. Let me also just get this loop down a little bit to where we actually want it. All right, there we go. So it doesn't have the chunks in there. All right, so now let's do it one more time and see if we need to trim some of that high end off of it. We could try a little bit. So let's say pre-sunset, pre-room, right? Before we, now I think it would be after. You wouldn't do it before the microphone. You would do it afterwards. So let's change this out. And let's bring in something that would have been on the board, like the API slider. Let's see if the slider is kind of like going to do what we want. All right. So this was on the Sunset's console, this 560 slider jammy. So I'm going to guess it's somewhere in this range here that we're going to need to slice out a little bit of. So let's play it and start cutting. Ooh. Okay. See if we had a little 500. Okay. I'm kind of liking where that is. So we have a slight mid kind of boost on that too. A little bit of a high cut. So that will be our room sound for just trying this out right now. Now we need to add the kind of, you know, that reverb, that big sort of reverb that was on there. So we're going to, as we said, theorize that this is the sound that was sent out to the chamber. So let's duplicate this track with all the settings, right? So it still has here, still has the sunset sound and the API slider on there. Okay. Now, what we wanted to do then is add another sunset sound unit, right? Which will have the chamber reverb. So we're going to go to, where is it? Chambers. Okay, so we're on chambers. I need to mute this room and go into this guy. Let's rename that track. So we don't want to get confused. So this is room plus chamber. Okay. All right, and we need to take the track and we need to create a track on this. So we're going to paste another one in there. There we go. Go to the back. There we are. All right, so now let's add some of the big chamber sounds and see where that gets us. So start with Studio One reverb. And we're 100% wet, no dry. All right, so let's do it, see what we get. All right. Now here's something that's interesting, right? That I've heard in last week's Van Halen 1 thing. Okay. Now I'm gonna cut this track to loop just in here where we just were. Okay. And what you're hearing here is something that's interesting. That's an effect of what we're doing post signal. And what you're hearing here, this thickening thing, is a beating of the frequencies. That's would be the word for it. It's a warble. It's a beating. It's like when two notes are slightly dissonant from one another. Let me try on this guitar here. It's just unplugged, but you're going to hear this, right? Hear it beating? Bum, 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 bum. And I can make it go faster. based upon how out of pitch they are, right? So what we're hearing here that is really thickening up things is a beating of frequencies that's creating this growl. So let's listen to that. Right here. Right, that it's beating. It's not really there if you take everything away, right? So we'll mute these guys and we'll just listen to it dry. It'll be there somewhat, but it's not going to be as bad. Right there, it just sounds more like static, right? Like, but when you get into here, you hear those low frequencies now starting to interact with each other and beat. The same thing on Running with the Devil on that chord, right? We heard it in last week's where I thought it started to sound really good was on this chord. That chord, with the way that we did the treatment, was creating a beating in the frequencies that wasn't there really to begin with. That added a growl, aggressiveness, just intensity to the sound. So I think we're somewhere with this. I could be completely nuts, but it's sort of what I'm thinking. All right, so let's get back to this. So we can listen to some of the other chambers and just make sure that we got a good one here. But let's see if it affects the beating. So let's leave this little portion looped and let's just try that. See it resonating for right there, that that is a resonance with the room, so to speak, right? So that I don't think sounds very good. You could probably cut that out with an EQ, or you could even emphasize it with an EQ, but I don't like that one. So let's go to Studio 3's chamber with the dual mics. That has a lower resonant frequency, more like, whoa. Let's go back to 1. Now I'm liking 1. All right, so I'm going to stick with 1. You know what? Let's just try the spring. I'm not the spring, the plate. While we're here, why not? Right, might as well. That's more like, oh. That's not bad. That sounds like some kind of evil machine. That AKG thing is nuts. I'm going back to the chamber. That is a cool unit. I got to play with a real one at Loho Studios in Manhattan once, with my friend Diego. If you're out there listening to this, what's up? Some crazy shit went down at Loho. I'm telling you, that place was out of control. It was where like John Mayer recorded a bunch of his stuff, and who else? Willie Nelson. There's some stories. But down in the basement, they had these AKG reverb units that, let's say, had a very interesting history. It was crazy. That was absolutely nuts. They also had like their mobile recording studio from the Rolling Stones in there and one of the BBC boards. That place was like unreal. I don't know if it's still in operation or not, but it was Loho Studios. Anyway, let's get back to this. So where were we? All right, so now we were going to try to maybe combine all 3 of our sounds and just see where we're at. See what else has to be done. I hear my computer's fan going on, which usually means that it's ready to puke. Hopefully not. Hopefully we'll be able to make it through this before it goes bonkers. All right, so we're going to turn on. We're going to bring these all down, and then we're going to bring them in, fade them in one at a time. All right, let's go. So let's start with the Start with the draw with the room. Let's try it around here. Then we'll add this dry. I gotta bring this back. Huh. I haven't listened to the album in a while, but I think it's stuck in my head enough to do it, sort of. I could go back downstairs and listen to the album. I'll be like, man, that was way the hell off. Probably is anyway, but we're trying the best we can. It's fun, though. We're learning all kinds of stuff, right? Like this whole revelation of having frequencies smash up against themselves to create a beating effect in the room, right? That can create an aggressiveness to the sound is a really interesting sort of idea. So I like just that alone is enough for me for today. All right, so then we're going to add in the reverb to it. All right, let's go. That may be a bit much. Let's see. Interesting. All right, so let's just save this project because I'm sure we're going to be using it again in the future. So we're going to call this the VH2. What are we going to call this? Ox Stomp project. Okay. All right, so there we go. Now what I want to do is I want to start panning things a little bit. This panning can really give you it could change frequencies in terms of how you interpret them, and it can create a sound stage or a spread or a stereo field that is more interesting to listen to, like psychoacoustically. So in last week's like Van Halen one thing, I kind of was like theorizing that maybe, he did the dry sound really hard or hardest to one side, and then started moving towards the center with the room, and then straight down the middle with the echoes, right? Because that would be everywhere. So that would kind of give Eddie his own little area in the sonic landscape to live in, where the drums could be like sort of in the middle, Dave could be over to one side or in the middle, and Mike could be over on the other side, and it would give you an impression like you're in the room with the band. So let's start with the dry. Let's move the dry over some, and then, you know what? Let's listen to it while we're doing it instead of theorizing about where they should be. Let's just listen to it and then see that it works. Okay, here we go. I'm kind of liking that. Like the way that is. I mean, I don't know. Down the middle wasn't bad, but this is sort of, we got it just panned a little bit more with the dry than we do with the room. Okay. Maybe we should just listen to the whole schlemiel of awful playing and see how it reacts to, DOA, that sort of like little thing there too, and some of the other stuff. Let's just see what it does. But sometimes listening to a different riff can show you that, it needs to be this way or that way. So let's listen to just the whole thing. Why not? Maybe too much reverb. Okay. Maybe we had the amp cranked up a little bit too much. As I think the amp wasn't as gainy on the second album as it was on the first. So that's a whole nother issue right there, right? That's a whole nother sort of like down the rabbit hole thing that I want to get into as well, is that I think there's a good possibility that his amplifier was changed, that something happened, something was done, you know, we're talking about an entire year of touring with the thing. All right. So different tubes, a different bias point. Maybe he, you know, changed the load resistor on the amp. Maybe he stopped using a load resistor on the amp. Maybe it was more or less biased hot or less hot. Different preamp tubes. You know, something in the amp might have let go. So I'm almost tempted, but I hate to do it. I'm almost tempted to like build another Marshmallow for myself and kind of use it as a Van Halen 2 sort of Marshmallow and set it up, because I'm not touching this amp because I think it's right in on the money for 1 for me. So for 2, maybe I'm going to set it up with a slightly different bias point, a slightly different maybe preamp tubes. Maybe you internally load it differently, so it's not so, the power amp isn't so clipped, right? And it gets a little bit fatter sounding. So use a different sort of like internal loading theory. I think I could do it with the transformers that I had made for the 1 amp, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. I think so, though. I really do, because it's really, the theory is pretty solid. So I think basically the amp will get a little bit louder, and not a lot, but a little bit louder, and it will get a little bit cleaner sounding. So let's just save this track, you know? I want to listen to it again and just see. What if we go on the master bus? Get on the master bus. Ha! And let's try putting a couple of things into the master bus just for, I want to see. So let's put in some LA2A. So I think that would be a good sort of dealio. All right, so now I've got 2 LA2As on my voice, because I put one on there to help monitor it. So let me cut the LA2A off on this channel only, right? So there's the LA2A. There we go. So now it's not so jacked. Go back to the master. All right. So it's a little bit of compression. And I do like the idea of that maybe an exciter was used on those albums just to create that sort of like sheen that you hear on, you know, those recordings from the 70s. That just, you know, really just, you know, brilliant sheen. So this exciter, you know, there was something called the Aphex Oral Exciter, I've been led to believe, may have been around those days. Which produced harmonics based upon distortion. So distortion, as we talked about before, it creates things that were not originally present in the signal, and those would be different orders of harmonics, which can then create upward frequencies so you can get more top end out of it. And distortion is surprisingly pleasing to the ears. So exciters work on that. So maybe we'll add this silver setting, right? And this isn't really perfect, but it's not bad. So we'll bring it on down to 0, and then we'll feather it in and see what it does. So let's listen to some LA2A first and see how that did for us, and we'll be able to bring it in and out. So let's play it. I like the LA2A. Maybe limit it a little more. Adjusting the frequency. All right, we'll go back to the beginning again, and then we'll add in some exciter, and then we may have to go back to the compressor. But let's bring that up. I like that kind of. That sounds good for today. I think I'm getting a little ear fatigue, so I think from this point on it might be just like chasing my tail here. I do want to hear this goofy stereo thing that they got in here. I don't really like it, but it's just kind of goofy. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it, man? Imaging, stereo spread. It just adds like this really like weird kind of psycho sound to it, right? That's my voice without it. That's my voice with it. That's my voice. All right, here we go. Let's see what this sounds like. Okay. You know, let's turn the loop back on again. And then they got this order here, which kind of moves it around in your brain. Yeah, it's kind of a little goofy thing. It's like ear candy, which, is what we're trying to get. We need candy for our ears. Ears get hungry. All right, let's just let's save it again, and then we'll just end it here, and we'll go back into reality. And let me turn off this thing so I don't have to listen to it while I'm talking. All right, so let's get out of GarageBand. We have it saved, and we'll end it up. I think that was probably enough of the repetitive of it. I was starting to get a little bit of ear fatigue, and I'm sure all you guys were getting it long before I was. So I think there's some fruit in there. I think there's that the room seems to be the predominant character that changes from album to album, right? Where the mics were placed, how they were placed. So that brings us to all different possibilities now for the different albums, but unfortunately only for the ones right now that were, recorded at Sunset, because those are the rooms that we have, or that I have. Maybe there are more rooms. So, for we need to explore also the isolation rooms, because I think maybe on Fair Warning, they may have used some of the isolation rooms to put Ed's cab into. Maybe. I mean, I know that in the Sunset Sound sort of like videos where they were talking about, how they recorded. And there was one video in particular that was relating to where Ed's amp was during the recording sessions of 51, or rather of Fair Warning, and that it was in the room. But, it could be at times. Maybe it's not. Maybe there could be two places for it. I don't know. But to explore all the different variations of the different isolation booths, rooms, and things like that. The other thing would be, there's no way in this program to move the mics around the room or to move the amplifier around in the room, right? Because if you put the amplifier in the corner, it's going to sound a lot different than if it's in the middle of the room, if it's banging off a glass, or if it's, tilted up, or where it is. So that is a huge sort of factor as well. So to duplicate this stuff exactly, you'd really need, it couldn't be done digitally. It would be such a pain in the butt to have like the ability of the software to estimate what would happen if you moved the source to a different area and mics into different areas and have all those variables. That would be insane. But at the actual studio, you could still do that. You could put the cabinet where it should be, and you could put, mics up and test where they would sound right. And my guess is you'd probably get a lot closer. But I think we're zeroing in on what, sort of was creating those characteristic sounds. So going to like 1984, his studio had to sound that way. The live rooms in 5150 had to have that sound. So if anybody knows, I think it would be really cool if they could do the same thing for 5150 as they did for Sunset Sound, right? To create a room sort of algorithm, right? A room response. As well as, I don't know if those rooms have changed too much. They may have been rebuilt over the years, or resized, or repaneled. So maybe, that room that existed in 1983 and around the time that it was built, maybe that room doesn't exist anymore in its original state. So the sound just cannot be gotten again. But it would be interesting to try that. Maybe it's possible to do it through plans, because there are, I think somewhere I saw like there was the building permit or the original 5150 studio plans, which would have indicated where the control room was, where the live room was, and that would have the dimensions. So theoretically, if you were to decide, okay, we've got this size room with, this ceiling height, length, width, and the materials, you may be able to recreate that room in theory, or you could actually recreate that room in practice and then make an impulse response for it. But, these are all wishes and wish lists, right? So I think that's good for today's kind of like deal. there were some emails that I got that were interesting. One, from let's see, from Plexidust, who was talking about using a lot of guys using a iPad for their VSTs, right? So they could play with them on stage. So you could use like the Sunset Sound reverb on, in a live setting. I guess the iPad is a better solution than would be, carrying around a MacBook, but it's still, I wish it were in, just a little pedal because, I'm got a lot of this gray hair and I like pedals. I don't, this whole idea of a phone being used to make music is it's kind of foreign to me. No matter how long I'm going to be doing it or using it or how long it's been around, it's still like that ain't right. All right. So, I think that's it for today, for Sunday. And appreciate you watching. Give me some ideas of what you think about how the room affects the sound. And if you heard anything and you were like the entire time, go, stop, put it there. So, yeah, leave me some comments, see what you think. And we'll see you again soon.